Right now, there's only one thing we really want to know, and that is if Magnus Carlsen is able to recover from that huge blunder he made yesterday against Vincent Keymer. The Germany's #1 exploited a grave error by the greatest player of all time and is in the lead. Magnus Carlsen needs to play now for a win with the white pieces. And in this video, we are going to have a look if he is able to bounce back and force the match into a tiebreak. Let's see what's going to happen. Magnus Carlsen playing with the white pieces, plays the move 1e4, and just make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see what's going to happen in this game and all the other exciting matches in this World Cup. So it's 1e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Spanish opening, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, and here maybe a small surprise for Vincent Keymer. There are a lot of moves. Castling kingside is, of course, the most common way of playing here. But white goes for the move d3. Also typical move just to avoid a very sharp and forcing kind of play. Magnus is looking for a way to grind out a very small edge in the long run. If he's able to get there, let's see. Black played here the move bishop c5. And here again, castling kingside is by far the most common move. But Magnus has a different idea. Played here the move bishop g5. Not a bad move, it's a developing move. You're pinning that knight on f6. Black played h6, questioning the bishop. Bishop goes back to h4. And now castling kingside would be a logical move for black, but Vincent Keymer played here d6. And I think Magnus had studied a little bit the ins and outs of this line. He knows that he's not going to have a big advantage, but here on move 8, he drops a novelty with the move d4. That's a remarkable twist because he first played his pawn to d3. Now he plays it to d4, attacking the bishop and forcing black to take on d4. E takes d4, knight takes d4, putting pressure on that knight on c6. So both knights of black are pinned. And of course, it's important to realize that you cannot take the knight on d4. Well, you can do it, but here white is going to recapture first on c6 with the bishop after b takes c6. Now it's time to take back with the queen on d4. And okay, it's not much, but there's a bit of play. Pawn on e4 versus pawn on d6. White has a space advantage, a little bit better pawn structure. That's something Magnus can do something with. Instead, Keymer played here the move bishop d7, and now after bishop takes c6, we get an imbalance in the structure. That's what white definitely needs in order to create some play. After b takes c6, black has the bishop pair, but also the slightly more vulnerable pawn structure on the queen side. With double pawns on the c-file, there are some long-term problems regarding black's pawn formation. Knight c3, black castled, queen d3, bringing the queen into the game, protecting both the pawn on e4 and still the knight on d4. And one of the ideas is also to castle queenside, so that you get a position with opposite castled kings, and that may possibly lead to a very sharp game. Black has different ways of playing. The most natural move would be to play here the move queen e7. Then your opening has been completed. You have connected your rooks. Black is, in my opinion, doing fine. But Vincent Keymer played here the move bishop b4 with the idea that castling queenside is not good now because of bishop takes c3. This is a little trick so that if white captures with the queen, there is a knight takes e4. Typical trick worth remembering as you're unpinning yourself by taking the pawn on e4, attacking the queen on c3 and the bishop on h4. This is great news for black if that happens. So that would mean b takes c3 is the way to recapture, but that's not what you want to do with your pawn formation in front of your king. So therefore, we need to make a little step backwards with the move knight de2. The knight drops back to e2 to support the knight on c3. Black goes queen e7, and now we are finally castling queenside. Opposite castled kings. Let's see who can come first with an attack. Black played rook fe8. White strengthens the pawn on e4 one more time. And here the move queen e5 played. And this is a big moment in the game. White has a number of interesting moves, and I'm not really sure which one is the best. It's a playable position. You can think of placing your king on a bit better square, a safer square on b1. Bishop g3 is an idea to attack the queen. You can also think about launching your g-pawn. But Magnus thought, let's question the bishop on b4 with the move a3. And after the move bishop takes c3, Magnus started to shake his head, realizing that he had done something wrong. Knight takes c3 is not possible because of queen f4 check, and that would lose the bishop on h4 because of the double attack. However, queen takes c3 was played. Magnus stood up from the board. He realized that he had done something wrong, but Vincent Keymer had no idea, just went for the exchange of queens and the game continued. Magnus probably had realized here that black has the amazing move knight takes e4. And this would have ruined Magnus Carlsen's dreams of winning the World Cup, because with this piece sacrifice, you are winning material. Look, after f takes e4, there is the move queen takes e4. You're 2 pawns up for the piece, and on the next move, because both the knight on e2 and the bishop on h4 are unprotected, black is going to regain the material, and that is basically game over. The only alternative is to take on e5, exchanging the queens first. But after rook takes e5, now the knight on e4 can still not be taken because of rook takes e4, and once again the same motive. This is another huge blunder, the second blunder in this mini match, but Vincent Keymer didn't refute it. He didn't realize there is this big moment in the game where he can basically kill the match and kick out Magnus Carlsen out of the World Cup. Instead, he exchanged queens, as I said. But now, okay, we get a sort of type of position. Queenless middle game, slightly better pawn structure for white. Is it going to be enough? Probably Vincent thought that his position is quite acceptable. He doesn't want to allow the doubling of pawns on f6. So he moved its knight away to h7. And the game goes on. Magnus, totally relieved that he is not punished for that horrible blunder. Play the move g4, not with the idea to go for an attack, but just to grab space towards the endgame. That is a nice a nice thematical theme for white to work with. And we will see how it works out. Black played f6, trying to set up a blockade in the center. White goes h3, knight f8, a lot of maneuvering, no more concrete lines. Now the queens have come off the board. Knight was rerouted to e6, h4, king f7, and here we see the plan. White is fixing the pawn on h5 to trying to prove that the pawn on g7 and also the other pawns on the dark squares, they may hopefully become a target for this bishop in the long run. Black goes rook 88, it's still very solid. Rook he1, both sides are centralizing their rooks. Bishop c8, rook d3, bishop b7. Not much is happening now, but this is the sort of scenario Magnus is really happy with. And he also thinks my knight on c3 is not doing much. Let's bring it back to b1 with the idea that the knight comes very quickly to d2 back into the game. So c5, white goes c4, cementing the pawn structure in the center. Now also the pawns on c7, d6 and c5 are on dark squares. The big question is which bishop is able to attack the opponent's pawns. That is what we are going to see very soon. Bishop c6, white goes b3, rook b8, bishop f2, rook b7, knight e2, rook eb8, tying down white's pieces to keep the pawn on b3 protected. Bishop e3. Bishop is nicely placed here on e3, working on two diagonals so that the knight cannot come into the position anytime soon. King g8, waiting move. King c2, slowly improving the king's position as well. Knight d8, and here Magnus goes for the move f4. He wants to break through via the center, and one of the ideas is to go e5. And therefore, I think knight f7 is a very nice move to prevent white's pawn break e4, e5. Or even later on, the move g4, g5 is anticipated by this knight move to f7. However, black went for the move a5, looking for counterplay. But here, white is able to open up the center so that white's rooks are excellently placed. After f takes e5, black is not recommended to take the pawn because of bishop takes c5. You're winning a huge pawn, and white's pawn structure on the queen side is much better as black has to deal with 3 isolated pawns. They are all potential targets for the white pieces. So therefore, knight f7 was played so that after e6 you can recapture with the c pawn. But white played here bishop f4. intensifying the pressure against the pawns. That was the idea of opening up the center. You also see that white's rooks are now better. D takes e5, bishop takes e5. And still, things are not clear at all. Maybe rook e8 is an idea, but bishop will go back to g3 to protect the rook. Rooks can get exchanged, and okay, black is still working with some pawn weaknesses on the queen side. If black is playing correctly with a move like a4, it should probably be a draw anyway with correct play, but the game continues. Instead of playing rook e8, black played the move a4 right away. But now, the next move is very instructive. White played here the move bishop c3. And you think, what is this idea? Well, you want to enter with a rook, if possible. Now, after a takes b3, you cannot recapture with a knight because the two rooks are covering the b3 square. The king goes to b2. Black has a passed pawn, but this pawn is really weak because it cannot come forward. And if one of the rooks is going to move, later on the pawn on b3 can be taken anyway. You don't want to see the rook entering on the 7th rank. So black now plays the move rook e8 anyway. Rook takes, bishop takes, and now the rook comes to d5. So the pawn on c5 will be captured. Bishop c6, with the idea that after rook takes, now the bishop can come back to d7 to attack the pawn on g4. More and more pawns are getting exchanged now. Black is getting closer to a draw, but the game is still very sharp because look, this pawn on the a file is an outside passed pawn. Bishop d4 played, bishop takes g4. This is the moment white brings up the a pawn. Very nice move. What should black do? Not very easy at all. I think a move like knight d8 with the idea to go to e6 very strong comes into consideration, with the idea also of bringing the king to the center very soon. But knight g5 was played in the game with similar ideas of playing knight e6 probably, but the bishop goes to e3, so that knight e6 is not a knight fork. Bishop is doing well on e3, and here black offers the exchange of knights, and I'm not sure, it makes it harder for black later on to deal with that outside passed pawn. So knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, and here the pawn comes to a5 with the idea to play a6 to hit the rook on b7. If the rook goes away, we can play a7. The bishop on e3 is supporting the pawn on a7. Even the white rook can get behind. Things are looking very nice. Black goes rook b4 with the idea that if you advance the pawn, there is rook a4 and you're no longer able to keep your pawn supported because the bishop covers the c6 square. There's no time to play here rook c6. Therefore, white, instead of playing a6, played here the move bishop d2. Very good move. So the rook gets behind, rook a4, king takes b3, hitting the rook on a4. It's very difficult to keep that rook there. But with the move bishop d1 check, the king got to go back. The king went to c3. And this is also a critical moment. What should black do? I think one idea is to try to keep the rook on a4. The rook stays in touch with both the pawn on a5 and the pawn on c4. And if you play a move here like bishop to e2, it's very difficult for white to move the rook from c5. If you move the rook, one of the two pawns will be lost. If the king goes to b3, you can go back to d1. In case of king d4, it's time to bring your king. Rook takes c7, king e6. You can even give up that pawn on g7. If you take that pawn on c4, black has excellent drawing chances in this endgame. With opposite colored bishops, the pawn on h5 is hanging. The only thing you need to do is to control the promotion square with your bishop. The endgame, possible endgame of rook and bishop versus rook is a theoretical draw. So if black is able to wrap up white's two remaining pawns, it is a draw. However, Vincent Keymer played here the move c6. And in my opinion, he's playing for a trick. Or not even a trick. He's hoping that after rook takes c6, rook takes a5, black is getting closer to a draw. But things are getting really tricky. White played here the move king d4. So the bishop also protects the pawn. Bishop goes to f3 to protect the pawn on c6. But now bishop c3. And here we have the critical moment of this endgame. The bishop looks very nice on c3. And you got to be careful. Black cannot bring its king closer to the center with king f7. It runs into rook f5 with a double attack. That is the big problem, that black is basically playing without that piece. Instead, Keymer played here the move bishop g2, and that is a serious mistake. What he should have done instead is try to stick to the pawn on c4. This is a very important technique. Now after rook takes c6, you can bring your king finally to f7, and it's difficult to make progress. You cannot play king c5 because the rook will take the pawn on c4. If you play the move a6, then very nice defensive technique is giving up the bishop. With bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, rook takes a6, and this is going to be a draw. Why? It's almost impossible to keep your h-pawn on the board. For instance, if you go rook c7, I run away with my king to g5, and later on, this pawn on h5 will be taken. For instance, black can give up its own pawns if it's just able to win the pawn on h5. This is a theoretical draw. Difficult to see, and Magnus was really making nice use of Keymer's lack of time on the clock. It's practically a holdable endgame for black, but it's so difficult being low on time. Keymer played bishop g2, stick to the pawn on c6, but now it's rook f5. This is a brilliant move, preventing the bishop from getting back to this diagonal to attack the pawn on c4 together with the rook. Bishop h3 was played, hitting the rook on f5, but now it's rook f4, another excellent move after bishop e6. Now the rook is helping the pawn on c4. You can play king c5. The pawn on c4 is now sufficiently protected. The bishop protects the pawn, and after rook a3, the king comes back to b4 to hit the rook. The rook can only go to a2. Now it's king b3. The rook cannot stay behind on the a file because the bishop covers all the squares together with the king. Rook went to e2, and now it's a6. Look at this pawn, it's only 2 squares away from winning the game. Bishop h3, making space for the rook to come back. But after a7, rook e8, there is rook e4, trying to deflect the rook. Beautiful motive. If you take on e4, it's a8 queen, and white is going to win the game. Black instead played the move rook to a8, but now the rook is really badly placed there. The white rook comes in to e7, protecting that monster pawn on a7. Black played here the move c5, and many people would just take the pawn on g7 and take it from there. That's absolutely fine, but also very classy move here by white is the move rook b7, threatening to force the exchange of rooks with the move rook to b8, because the pawn on a7 covers the b8 square. After something like bishop g2, there is rook takes g7 now, and by postponing that capture on g7, you force the bishop to go to an inferior square. You can pick up the bishop, and this endgame is going to be an easy win because the remaining pawns will be taken very soon. And that's why, after the move rook b7, Vincent Keymer resigned. Magnus Carlsen did the absolute miracle by winning on demand, forcing the match to go into a tiebreak. He's still alive in the World Cup. Tomorrow he's going to play the tiebreaks in a rapid format, and maybe it's going to even be taken to the Blitz as well. We will get to see, but obviously this is a huge blow for Vincent Keymer, who was really close of causing the biggest upset possible in the tournament. But unfortunately for him, it didn't happen.